This is Red Ice Radio. From the visible to the obscure. redicecreations.com.
Good to have you back with us again. Thank you for listening to Red Ice Radio. My name is Henrik Palmgren and we are coming to you from the west coast of Sweden. A warm welcome to everyone tuning in from around the world. You can follow us on redicecreations.com. We have authors Christopher Knight and Alan Butler with us today to talk about their work and very interesting research. Christopher Knight became a writer almost by accident. In 1976 he became a Freemason because he was curious to know about what the organization really was about. He decided to conduct his own research, and for the next 20 years he slowly reconstructed the origins of the craft. He is probably best known for his investigations into ritual and belief systems, and has together with Robert Lomas produced the Hiram Key book series. Alan Butler is an engineer as well as a professional writer. He set out on a 2-decade search that led to the decoding of some of the most important details regarding prehistoric knowledge and achievement in Europe. Alan Butler is recognized expert in ancient cosmology. Chris and Alan have co-authored 4 books so far: Civilization One, Who Built the Moon, Solomon's Power Brokers, and the latest one is called Before the Pyramids. Good stuff is coming up, so stay with us. Alright, we have a very, very interesting program for you guys lined up here today. We have Christopher Knight with us on the line together with Alan Butler, both co-authors of many different books on many different subjects. We have a couple of books here that we primarily want to talk about. Civilization One, The World Is Not As You Thought It Was, and also Who Built the Moon. And of course, Christopher and Alan brought to my attention as well that they have a new book out recently called Before the Pyramids, Cracking Archaeology's Greatest Mystery. And I haven't even had time to look into that one yet. They're putting out books all the time on these very, very interesting topics. But first of all, then, let's welcome on Christopher Knight to the program. Thank you for coming on and taking the time to talk with us today, Christopher.
A great pleasure. Good to be with you, Henrik.
Excellent. And welcome, of course, to Alan Butler as well. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today, Alan.
Hi, Henrik. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. And let's see if we just maybe briefly here can talk a little bit about the background. Christopher, you've been obviously investing a lot of time into the Hiram Key and the series of books that you have been putting out in terms of researching the origins of the Freemasonic rituals. Maybe you can just tell us about the bridge, I guess, from this over to the work like Civilization One. The pyramid work obviously is an obvious connection, but also Who Built the Moon and so forth. Tell us a little bit about your background, Christopher.
Well, my background is in advertising and marketing, so nothing to do with the subject or subjects that have sort of possessed my life for the last 35 years or so. I started out by wondering what Freemasons got up to, because I'd heard good things about them and I'd heard bad things about them, and I thought the best thing to do is to join. And if I don't like it, I can leave. So at the tender age of 26, I became a Freemason. And over the first couple of years, it became very clear that no one had a clue where they came from or what the very strange rituals were about. So as a personal hobby, I started to investigate it, and that took me 20 years, in which time I was reconstructing the development of the Jewish people and early Christianity. And believe it or not, though, I'd never expected to write a book. It just seemed to be eventually so interesting that somebody might be interested in it, and then it's now in over 40 languages. It's just amazed me that people have been interested in it. But all of the research I've been involved with, latterly the last 12 years or so with Alan, is all a continuation of that. No, there hasn't been a break point or a change of subject. They seem very different, but they're not. It's just that it really has opened a bit of a Pandora's box here. The stuff that's come out, I just couldn't believe, because I'm a very sort of straight-laced person, and if somebody said I was going to publish a book called Who Built the Moon, I would have thought that's ridiculous. But I've been part of that with Alan, so times change.
That's right. This is where the evidence and the questioning has led you.
You
obviously
have to have white sheet of paper and no baggage, and you go where the evidence takes you. That's our golden rule. Alan and I stick to that, and whatever we find, if it breaks an old theory, out goes the theory, and we'll investigate something that others wouldn't, because they'd say that's too crazy. people will lock me up if they find out that I'm looking at that. Well, unfortunately, the truth sometimes is crazy. They say it's stranger than fiction, and it certainly is. So our golden rule is to have no preconceptions, defend nothing, assume nothing, just keep testing and keep testing.
Absolutely, and that is excellent. And then let's talk a little bit about your background, Alan. You have a engineer, I think, as a background. You've been fascinated by history and astrology and astronomy as well. So I guess what's your connection to this kind of work, and maybe you can tell us how you guys hooked up as well, Alan.
Well, I've always been interested in the way things work, which I guess is why I went out through my schooling and then went on to become a mechanical engineer. But all the way down the line, I'd also written things, and when I was in my late teens, I became interested in astrology, having been interested in astronomy since I was a child. I'd been writing all sorts of articles and bits and pieces for different journals, and then, probably about 25, even 30 years ago, I went on holiday to Crete, the island of Crete, the Greek island in the Mediterranean, and I happened across a strange little object called the Phaistos disc. It's a double-sided clay disc which goes back to about 2000 BC. It was found in the ruins of a palace. Both sides are covered with hieroglyphics, different patterns on each side. And to cut a long story short, I came to realize that what I was looking at was probably some sort of calendar, but it was one that I estimated was based on a different kind of year structure to the one we have now. I thought, as I finished my first book on the subject, which was called The Bronze Age Computer Disc, that we might be looking at a year of 366 days. And it was at that point that I happened to meet Chris. I'd read the Hiram Key. I wrote to Chris and to Bob, his co-writer, and they were kind enough to meet me in a pub, actually, in Halifax, in the north of England, where we both live. And I explained what I'd been doing, and then I'd read their book, and in a sense the rest is history, because for a while I cooperated with Chris and Bob on the work they were doing, and then Chris and I found deeper reasons to look more deeply into certain facts, particularly regarding a measurement called the megalithic yard. And it was that led us to get together, and it's been a very fruitful relationship, because although we're two very different people in lots of ways, when we get together, things really start sparking.
Absolutely, and of course the book Civilization One deals quite a bit with obviously the idea of an advanced culture in prehistory around this idea of measurement, the megalithic yard, as you mentioned, Alan. And obviously this is, Christopher, the direct tie here, I guess, right away with masonry, architecture, precise building techniques, and so forth. What did you find then in terms of the connection to I guess, speculative masonry that we have around today? Was there any of this kind of knowledge still within the Freemasonic environment, would you say?
It's turned out that having spent many, many years digging up the original or more authentic and very old rituals of Freemasonry, they tell a story which most people would imagine would be fictional, which goes back 3,000, tells a story that goes back 3,000 years. In fact, all the facts suggested is absolutely a detailed history of real events. But it turns out in a strange circular manner that Freemasonry is the remnant of something that is extremely ancient, that stonemasonry used to be directly connected to astronomy, the ancient stone structures from prehistory that we find across northwestern Europe were built for observational astronomy and older structures even before them. But the ability of the priest stroke astronomer to predict seasons and measure time and to control the environment and understand the tides came from the ability to work stone and to put stones in very exact places so the sky could be measured and charted. And even today, Freemasonry has all that where the way it works from the heavens in a Masonic temple, the sky's there with all its stars and everything's set out to record the solstices and the equinoxes, and it is a memory of a super ancient science that has been forgotten. And the most alarming thing for me, and I suspect for Alan, is that it's more advanced than anything we have today, which is a huge contradiction, obviously, with everything else we know about these people from 5,000-6,000 years ago. So it looks, we can't find a better explanation, as though they were reinventing something after the disasters that beset the world, as though there had been an advanced civilization that has got lost, gone away, but the memory of its science continued, and in fact is the root of our modern measurement systems and our modern science. So we've been teasing this apart, and there is a continuation over thousands of years to Freemasonry today. It's just that Freemasons, by and large, don't know it.
That's right. We have a whole other branch, of course, in terms of the speculative, and maybe we can talk more about that later as well. It's an interesting idea about how some of this knowledge have been lost, but yet at the same time seem to have been kept, if you will, in certain maybe even rituals or initiations and what have you. But Civilization One, then, Alan, is that referring to the rebuilding of the civilization after this, cataclysm that is believed to have happened, or is it referring to the one that was probably before this time, then, Alan?
Well, I think your starting point is the correct one. We were trying to reconstruct what was left of this ancient science, and it was that led us back to the possibility of a previous civilization. Although Chris had done some work on the subject in some of his previous books, I think we tried to remain very open-minded about it, because to think that there could once have been a culture which had more scientific knowledge and a better understanding of the solar system in particular than we have now is far-reaching. And Chris and I are both quite pragmatic in our view of life. We have this kind of belief that if it doesn't scratch glass, it's not a diamond. And there appeared to be no absolute direct evidence that this previous civilization had existed. But everything that was falling out of the numbers indicated that right back at the time when people were dragging stones across the landscape in northwest Europe and building structures like Stonehenge, for example, there was an underlying knowledge which the people themselves, with the technology they possessed, could not have worked out for themselves, and that meant that they must have got the information from somewhere, and that's what ultimately led us back to realizing there must have been a pre-existent civilization.
But there is a really interesting article authored by both of you up on Graham Hancock's forum that basically the title is, "Was Our Solar System Designed to Produce Humans?" I guess the further and further back you guys are going in this, the stranger it becomes, it seems, as well, because I guess on one level all of this is connected in one way or another then. But Christopher, is there anything you can tell us a little bit about that article and about some of the conclusions you came to?
Sure. I think it's important when you look back now to appreciate that Civilization One is 2004, and whilst that's not 7 years ago, it represents 8 and 9 years ago research. And at that time, we were just trying to be very pragmatic and investigate this unit called the megalithic yard. And it led deeper and deeper. And I've known Graham Hancock for many years, and he's always been talking about this lost, wonderful civilization of the past that he believes existed. And I've been less than convinced. But I've had to say, Graham, you've got to be right. I can't think of another alternative but to say this must be right. But that's relatively recent for us. And after Who Built the Moon, we started to, and we found more and more evidence, in fact, that Freemasonry hasn't got any amnesia at all. It has intact knowledge of this science, but only at the very, very top in Washington, D.C. So with something I've been denying for years and years, going in interviews, saying Freemasonry hasn't got anything. It's forgotten where it's come from, and it doesn't possess anything. It does, but only at the very, very top. But the conclusion that's referred to, as you say, on Graham Hancock's website about was the solar system, in fact, the universe created for mankind, is becoming extremely respectable for leading astrophysicists to talk about, let alone people that are digging into the distant past, like Alan and myself. There are increasing numbers of people who have been disbelievers should we say, in anything like this, which includes myself, converting and saying something really, really odd is going on here. And I can't think of an explanation. It's Sir Fred Hoyle, the astronomer royal here in the UK a generation ago, said the solar system is a put-up job. He said this didn't happen by accident. And increasingly people are, serious scientists are saying that. Anthony Flew, a lifelong, huge intellectual professor who has been the heart of the atheist viewpoint of philosophy, has vehemently, his entire life, spent saying what nonsense people with religion speak, suddenly changed. He didn't become a Christian or such, but he said, there is now no doubt in my mind, I have to take the evidence as it stands, and this is due to conscious creation. There is no, this is a man in his 80s who spent his entire academic life at the top, of the tree, and he's had to change his mind. And humble people like myself are finding the same effect, and all sorts in between. Only people that select their evidence or choose to follow a party line of some standard scientific institute maintain that there isn't something very, very odd. Maybe there's another explanation we haven't thought of, but goodness knows what that would be. This is
apparently where the evidence is leading at this point. Then, in that sense, what would you guys say is the some of the prime evidence for this? Is it the nature of the composition, if you will, of the solar system? We've been talking before with other guests on the program about the incredible ratio, if you will, between Sun, Moon, and Earth, especially that trinity, if you will, and then the fact how the during a solar eclipse, the moon perfectly blocks out the sun. There seems to be a ratio here, and we're told, of course, that this is moving. Moon is moving further away from us all the time, and so forth as well. I don't know if that's true, but Alan, what can you say about the composition of our solar system?
Well, in fact, the moon is gradually moving away from the Earth, as it has been doing more or less from when it came into existence, which was right back at the start of the solar system about 4.6 billion years ago. But you mentioned another fact which is crucial to all that we've discovered. Yes, all these strange patterns, like, for example, the existence of total solar eclipses, are only relevant now at this particular point in time. In addition to recognizing, as many scientists are doing now, that our Earth is a very, very strange and lucky place, and that it probably is not replicated very often throughout the solar system, we have to bear in mind the fact that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the moon, let alone the position of the Earth. The moon does all sorts of jobs in terms of upright, stopping it toppling over. It's slowed down the rate of spin of the Earth. It's inspired tectonic activity, which has allowed the Earth to be a gas, which our companion planets like Mercury and Venus definitely are not. The crust is constantly moving. New minerals and metals are constantly being regurgitated from the centre of the Earth. And this is all thanks to the moon. All of that is interesting enough, but what led us to looking at the moon was numbers. We saw the measuring systems that we knew had existed for the Stone Age and Bronze Age people of Northwest Europe, and we understood that these measuring irrevocably to the size and the mass of the Earth, which is why we knew that these people could not know them for themselves. But what really surprised us was when we went on to realize that the same inherent measuring systems were present for the moon and also for the sun. And we began to realize that what we were looking at were deliberate messages that someone had left us. I mean, there are literally dozens of them. They appear in specific kinds of numbers that appear unrelated to different phenomena, but you get the same numbers cropping up, as if someone had a note and left it there. And of course, because they all are associated with the moon, and because the moon is moving away from the Earth, these messages are only relevant now, at the first time in the Earth's history when there is a species intelligent enough to look up and see them.
Well, that's right, and I think you guys attribute this to the unknown creative agency, I think you call it. Chris, do you have any more theories about what or who this is? Are we talking about God, other beings, or AI? What is it?
Well, it's just interesting to note that since we wrote that book, in fact, this year, leading scientists working with NASA, leading academics, have flip-flopped the old idea by people like Carl Sagan used to say, well, there are billions and trillions of planets and stars out there. There must be millions, if not billions, of planet Earth-type places with life on them. The view now is we're probably alone. So that would sort of discount the alien theory. And all of the indicators, because it also looks like we are at the center of the universe, which is a strange thing to say, but it appears that we are not just that funny little star on the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, this minor star. It's starting to look up very much different to that. And it does look as though humankind is the grand plan. We must be letting our maker down somewhat at the minute, I think, in various ways, but maybe we've got a long way to go. But when we wrote Who Built the Moon, we could only think of three possibilities for this. We welcomed any reader to come up with their own, but we could only think of it was God, as the major religions believe. It was aliens that are wanting to seed the universe, or more controversially, but in fact more simply, that it was humans that created it by using time travel, knowing that if they didn't create the Earth in this particular way, we wouldn't exist. So they had to not necessarily travel back in time themselves, but certainly send robots and machinery back in time to build the moon, and most particularly, as there would be no humans. And certainly the moon has all of the signs of being completely artificial. It's like no other known object in the night sky at all. But since that time, Alan and I have been wrestling with this dilemma, and we are we're not so sure that we're agnostics. I mean, I was an agnostic almost to the point of being an atheist, but I'm not sure that either of us can say that anymore. And the God theory, which for us was an outside shot, is looking strong. And we're certainly working in that area at the minute. The alien one sort of discounts itself because there is no evidence whatsoever of any aliens in any accepted form. I know that plenty of people say there's evidence, but there is none that I know of. I've seen some pretty weird claims, which almost convince me. So Occam's razor says that is the least likely. But we don't know. But at the minute, we're finding the idea. Because the term God has got so much baggage.
Well,
people
of course.
Think about it and connect it to their own religions and their own rituals. It's got to be looked at as a creative force that caused the universe to come into existence. And the reason for it, or the pinnacle of all that, appears to be humans.
Because no matter how much machinery or robots we built or AI systems or what have you that potentially have the capability then, as you mentioned, to actually go back in time or time travel because of they have a different composition obviously than we do, that still doesn't explain the origins of mankind and why we were here to do that.
It does, because potentially does anyway, because traveling in time is counterintuitive, and a lot of average people have a difficulty thinking we could go back to create ourselves, as though that would be impossible. It's not. Physicists now fully accept that time travel is not only possible but probable in the near future. So it isn't difficult. And building DNA, because the DNA that is important to us now has been here since the beginning of time. Now, that could have been constructed and seeded by any one of those three entities. You may be aware of the guy Craig Venter, who
sure, he's doing it currently. He's building artificial life right now.
Yeah, It's not truly artificial insofar as he's using the building blocks from existing materials, but to mark out his synthetic DNA, he's putting a watermark in it, and he's using a quotation from James Joyce: to live, to err, to fall, to triumph, to create life out of life. And he's marking this as a coding into it. So every cell of this creature has got that in it. And the main point about DNA, our own DNA and all life on Earth, is that the majority of it is locked up and has been locked up since the Genesis. Like Fort Knox. And leading physicists are saying there could be huge amounts of information in there if we could but read it. And Alan and I got this tentative idea that the very obviously deliberate mathematical patterning of the solar system may be giving us the ratios to unlock how to read the information within the DNA.
Very, very interesting indeed. And Alan, tell us a bit about what your angle on this is as well in terms of the DNA then, and also if because if we go back to this idea that once upon a time mankind seemed to have more of a, I guess, connectivity to the source of some of this information, and how do you think it is that we could have at that point come up with things like the megalithic yard, which have all these interesting, mathematical equations or coincidences, I guess, in one sense, incorporated into it?
Yeah, as Chris says, the area that we tend to be looking at most at the moment, for all sorts of reasons, is the possibility of an external creative force. But if we were to go back to the idea that maybe it was humanity that did these things, it makes a kind of sense, even though it appears to be paradoxical, because any species like ourselves that masters time and can go back in time and build the moon would have no difficulty, in introducing DNA onto the Earth. Once having created the moon then did all the jobs necessary to provide the nutrients and to provide the circumstances, temperature, water, etc., that was right for life to develop. Now, there is a kind of microbe that still exists, particularly in parts of Australia, which is almost identical with what has been recognized as being the first true life on Earth. And, of course, if you can travel back in time to build the moon, you can also travel back in time to take the DNA, which is living in rock pools in Australia and is still as primitive as it ever was because it's not changed, and reintroduce it into the right sort of environment. So we can't rule out the possibility that we did it, but it seems paradoxical. We've turned our brains inside out between us trying to think about how this would be possible. And when we really iron out all the flaws, it's not really paradoxical at all, because if you imagine as you go back down the corridor that represents the past, there would be doors to the right and left of you with specific events which were close to you. You weren't there, so you can't be part of them. But you may come across doors that are open. You may be able to enter a time frame simply because you were there. It then becomes a part of history. And though it seems paradoxical, it's not. Maybe that's the mechanism by which the moon was built and by which DNA was introduced onto the planet. But still, in the middle of all of that, there is a question that has to be asked, because this kind of view of the present and the past and the future precludes a motivation, an origination, for example, of DNA.
Right.
We can take DNA back in time and introduce it onto the infant Earth. But really, if that's the case, you end up with a circle, and there appears to be no point at which DNA was actually created by anybody. And maybe, without wishing to get too philosophical about this, maybe that's where God lives.
Interesting. So, how old do you guys believe mankind is then? Are we talking about millions of years, or maybe, again, since we're we're on the topic of time travel, I guess the idea of linear time, in the sense we're thinking about it, kind of goes out the window. What do you think, Christopher?
I think the standard science of evolution of the planet and of life forms, including human life forms, is pretty damn accurate. Who are we to to imagine it's not, because DNA has come on a journey. The whole principle of DNA is that it allows deviation, which may be disastrous or may be beneficial. And if it's beneficial, that creature survives and reproduces, and therefore you've got ongoing inbuilt systems of improvement, which is what evolution is about. Darwin's theory of evolution is all about the survival of the fittest. But the key parts of DNA haven't changed. The so-called junk parts, used to be called junk parts, the parts that don't allow any modification, which is why it's been suggested that they contain information. But I think mankind, in our current form, has been around for about 120,000 years. Obviously, other hominid types have been around for a few million years, and we did evolve from apes, and we share 98-point-something% of our DNA with other primates, and we share 60% of our DNA with a daffodil. So all life on Earth is as one. And in terms of DNA, some very lowly forms of life have got much more complex DNA than we have. So it isn't a matter of complexity of DNA. There's a whole different agenda. So humans in our current form haven't changed really in the last 120,000 years, which is why it's not surprising that there is room for a previously advanced society, if you like, because things can go backwards as well as forwards. You know, we appear to be pedaling backwards somewhat at the minute, but as a species, as an organization on the planet, but in many respects. But it doesn't stand to reason that until the agricultural revolution 7, 8, 9,000 years ago, mankind was sitting on their hands staring at the cave wall, because they were as intelligent. If we could have this time machine and we could go back 100,000 years and take a baby, it had just as much chance of getting a first-class degree from a university as any other baby. Intellectually the same, physically more or less the same as we are. So it doesn't. Humans are all about curiosity and desire to improve and to understand. Why should we? 100,000 years have just sat there staring at the cave wall. It doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And we know there have been major periods of 10,000 years ago. There were major cometary impacts which created huge global disasters, which wiped out thousands of species and nearly wiped out humans. And certainly, if there had been any advanced civilizations such as we enjoy today, it probably would not have survived intact, although its knowledge may have done, and in fact does appear to have done it.
So what do you guys believe that, if you will, then initiated mankind into curiosity of changing its path, pretty much? I've heard Graham, talk somewhat about the use of hallucinogenic drugs and things like that. That's a path he's gone down. What's your view on that?
That's closely connected, it would seem. It's strange how things come together over time. It seems that there is some sort of spiritual dimension that that those that say that humanity's got some distance to go and on more spiritual planes and things, the sort of things that I always went, oh my gosh, another hippie. But actually, it does appear to be true, and there are various ways of inducing these states. It's not just mind-expanding drugs. It can be done with large stones, and indeed it was done with large stone structures. And it can be done by religious ecstasy.
Practices and rituals, maybe?
Yes, of triggering releases of this hormone into the brain, which appears allegedly and tested by serious people to enable the brain to work as a receiver of signals on another level. Now, that all sounds very odd, and it's beyond our sphere of activity. because we're not providers of answers. I think Alan will agree. We're providers of the interesting questions.
Right. Maybe you're referring to the work of Rick Strassman and
Rick Strassman,
DMT.
certainly. Yeah, I didn't want to, but that's exactly what I was referring to.
Right,
yeah,
right. We've had him on the program, so
yeah.
You have,
I think it's also worth mentioning that despite the fact that Chris and I both go down the same sort of road in terms of what Chris has just been talking about, there may be a less spiritual answer to the question of how we became enlightened, how we became so intelligent, which can be answered in terms of longevity of the individual. It was Chris who came up with some fascinating research that indicated that there was a period when humanity suddenly started to get very much older, and they knew this. Anthropologists and archaeologists knew this from the state of the teeth of people that were found at certain points in history, and it would appear that there was a very definite threshold at which people started to live much longer. That in itself may have tipped us over the edge, because before that, any human being could only amass the amount of information which it could amass in a fairly short lifestyle, and the amount of lifetime, and the amount of information given to it from the previous generation was also commensurate with the short life cycle. Now, if creatures like human beings suddenly start to live almost twice as long, then the experience threshold is pushed further out, and the ability to pass on that information is also increased, and it becomes exponential. And then we see human beings becoming much more advanced tool users, and generation by generation, 1 minute we're using flint tools, the next minute we're sending men to the moon. So we don't necessarily need to go down the spiritual road to see how it's possible that we got where we are.
Absolutely. What's your take, Alan, on directed panspermia and things like this, that we might have had an external, body coming in and actually bringing something to the planet that could even actually incorporate our own, that the DNA from, that we're composed of today actually comes from there. But it could be lesser things as well, like fungi or even introducing new plant species that actually could have led to this new, igniting of the creativity in mankind, if you will, Alan.
I mean, this cannot be ruled out, and the work in the past of Sir Fred Hoyle and Professor Wickramasinghe have added greatly to our thinking about the way cometary fragments in particular may have brought microbes of one sort or another into the atmosphere, which somehow have survived and taken root on the Earth. The only thing I would say against that is it's kind of a bit like pushing the situation backwards and blaming it on somebody or something else. It's a little bit like the way religion has developed. As science got better and better, so God's position in things changed quite significantly over a period of time, and things which were once quite definitely the prerogative of God have now, in the minds of most rational people, become the prerogative of science and physics. And so it could be suggested that seeing things being brought into our solar system and down to our Earth on other fragments from elsewhere in space is really just pushing the situation back down the corridor.
I think it's pretty much a non-starter. Yes, it's an interesting idea to float out, but if, as leading astrophysicists are saying, that there is no other life out there because of the conditions the requirements for life, water, for example, is so stunningly rare. Where would we have been seeded from? I don't think I really have come to the tentative conclusion that there probably isn't anything else out there. So I would remain open to it, but I think that's not a very helpful suggestion that it came from somewhere else. It's, as Alan says, it's just pushing back the boundaries. But going back to the point that was made a minute ago about the importance of when people started to grow older, if you've got people dying shortly after giving birth, so, the 17, 18, 19, there isn't enough time to generate an intellect. And it's interesting that in the period of what we call the Celts and the people in the Western Europe that were here creating stone structures, they suddenly lived to much older age, and like Freemasonry, they didn't allow writing. Everything had to be learnt by memory, because they passed on information that could be accrued over 50 or 60 years or more by one person to their chosen recruits. But it was all verbal, and in Freemasonry, although people cheat, it is supposedly a verbal tradition. And also, no metals are allowed. No metals were allowed in these stone sites, although metals had become available in other places. They didn't allow them because they had a detrimental effect on the ferroelectricity that was working in these stones and discharges randomly. So I strongly suspect that those two traditions within Freemasonry of permitting no metals and no written word is part of this ancient tradition. But that wasn't the genesis. This was the reawakening of ancient knowledge. When we were at Civilisation One, we thought it was probably the original group. But as we went further and further and found how deeply into the solar system and beyond that this information goes, it became clear that these megalithic people could not have done it.
So you mentioned the stones as being, well, I want to hear your take on this a little bit more. We can begin with you, Alan, in terms of maybe magnetic resonators, maybe creating an altered states of consciousness. There's other researchers out there, like John Burke, for instance, that suggested that this actually had to do with, crops and actually increasing the crop yield and the strength of the seeds and many other actually very, very interesting ideas. What's your take on that, Alan?
Well, I mean, I've got something particularly interesting to say about that one factor. I had a friend who lived not far from where I am in the north of England, and he'd got some stones which had come out of a stone circle which had stood up in a place on the moors here in Yorkshire, which subsequently was used for forestry. So the stones had to be relocated, and he said to me, after all your work on with Chris on this kind of thing, do you feel equipped to build a new standing stone circle? And so I helped him, and we placed the stones in the same sort of mathematical configuration that Chris and I knew had existed all over the northwest of Europe. And he had a very extensive back garden, but a very, very exposed back garden out towards the North Sea. And to cut a long story short, within a year, the rate of growth of everything in his garden and surrounding his garden, up to about 50 feet away, was absolutely phenomenal. Now, the man subsequently moved house. He didn't want to leave his stone circle behind, so he took it with him, and we rebuilt it in exactly the same format that it had been built, and he moved to a garden which admittedly was slightly less exposed than his first one. But the same thing happened again, and the plant growth accelerated dramatically. I wouldn't be at all surprised if one of the main reasons for the building of originally henges, which underpin the stone circles, and the stone circles themselves, has some very dramatic effect. We have to bear in mind that nobody built anything like this until people started farming. It may well be that there was a very practical reason for doing so.
So, do you know, I'll let you in a minute, Chris, do you know if this was built in a specific pattern, let's say, in the model of Stonehenge or something similar?
Well, what we find is, or what we found from the work of a man called Professor Alexander Thom, he was the one who first studied the stone circles and alignments in great detail. He knew there were mathematical patterns built into the way they'd been erected, and that the gaps between the stones were always divisible by this unit we mentioned earlier, the megalithic yard.
Yes.
So the site that I built here was, of course, very much smaller than something like Stonehenge, but it retained the same geometry and it retained the same physical measurements. And I think it's something to do with that, which caused the crops to grow in the way that they did, probably because you're locking into some resonant frequency, which is tied very closely to that specific measurement.
Chris?
I think there's an extra layer of technology in here, because what Alan says, is clearly the case. But I think they did it. They probably did it much more impactfully than that. And in the Book of Enoch, which is a very ancient book, it's known to be at least 2,300 years old. But I think it's an oral tradition that it puts it right back, way back. And of course, they refer to people creating strange creatures by putting them in caves and putting them in stone structures to adjust their DNA. They didn't use the term DNA, obviously, and they caused all sorts of strange creatures to be born, which was very alarming to the priests that were looking back on this. Now, we know there are strange things like the domesticated sheep came from goats in no time flat. All the dogs on the planet currently, from Chihuahuas to Great Danes, come from wolves. This was accelerated genetic manipulation. It just might have been something to do with the way rocks were used. Now, we also knew that these people went to great difficulties, great purposefulness to heat the standing stones they put up. They heated them to the Curie temperature, which is 700-800 degrees C, which causes the quartz, the ferroelectricity within the quartz, the dipoles, to align, because they're normally scattered, and they align with the Earth's magnetic field when they hit this Curie temperature. So they heated these stones all aligned north to south. We know they did this. And of course, it took huge numbers of carcasses of fat to get these sorts of heat built up. And then they put them in the ground aligned. Now, I've been involved in an experiment, and I really am a sort of damp squib. I don't believe anything. And I've got to speak to Rick Strassman if I can get hold of the guy and tell him what happened to me. I was completely blown to pieces. It wasn't marginal what happened to me. And it was using these stones that were 5,000 years old and knowing exactly the right place to go. They were using engineering and they were using electricity, not in the way we use it, plumbing it around our houses to heat kettles and power televisions. They were using it to, it appears, to open up pathways in the brain.
Wow, that's really interesting. Is there anything more you want to share with us in terms of your experience, or would you rather withhold that to another time, Chris?
I've really got to withhold that because I'm trying to put a team together of scientifically of different people from different sciences, from medicine not least.
I can certainly tell you, Henrik, it's phenomenal.
I don't doubt it. It's very interesting.
What it did to me was quite amazing. My powers were changed. It only lasted about 3 days. For 10 minutes of standing in this particular spot gave me 3 days of superpowers.
Okay, very interesting. How did you guys know how to do it now then, in that sense, because you've dug up, I guess, this kind of tradition or practice again, but do you have any idea about how they managed to do this, or rather how they knew how to do this, Alan?
Well, if we go back to the idea of a pre-existent civilization, a Civilization One, it's quite possible that throughout the generations, certain people, who I suppose now we would call priests or shaman, would retain this information. Even as recently as the time when the Romans invaded Britain at the beginning of the present epoch, we know that the Druids, who were the priests of the Celtic people, were taking 20 years to be trained, and yet there was no written language. They were taking it all in. Maybe that tradition goes back an awful long way, so maybe it was taught from one generation to another, and maybe it came from this pre-existing civilization. But again, we have to be very careful because things can get pushed back down the corridor of time, which is sometimes just an excuse for saying I don't really know. But of the fact that the stones have these powers that human beings can harness, I too have no doubts, because although I've never experienced anything anywhere near as amazing as what Chris went through, there are a lot of things happen around standing stones. Machinery won't work right. Cell phones in particular do not like standing stones. But that doesn't always happen. 9 times out of 10 it happens, but you'll get the odd time when it doesn't. And that is in a kind of a place where you get the feeling, an instinctive feeling, that the power has been disconnected, that somebody's pulled the plug. Not all of these monuments are still switched on. And once you get attuned to the feelings of them, you can usually say when you get to a site that you haven't been to before, whether you think it's still plugged in or not.
It's interesting with the magnets that you mentioned here, Kristen, as well, heating up the stones in order to realign the magnetite in the stone. We can see this in terms of what people call the evidence for previous, magnetic pole shifts, if you will, that apparently the alignment of the magnetics in certain stone is faced in an opposite direction or another direction, if you will.
Yes, again, that's where it's been heated. It can be campfires can be dated because of the shift in the Earth's magnetic field, I believe. But these large chunks of stone, to get all of the quartz inside that to align was a massive undertaking. Their GDP, the output of their society, they spent such huge amounts of time cutting these pieces of rock, aligning the dipoles in the quartz and placing them with such accuracy. I mean, as Professor Alexander Thom demonstrated, these stones are placed with an accuracy of a width of a human hair or less. I mean, the amount of hunting time, of planting time, of farming time that they gave to all this means it must have been hugely important to them.
Absolutely, and before we round things up here, then for the first hour, and you're going to leave us for now, Alan. But we'll continue talking with the Chris here, obviously, in the second. But I just want to run this idea by you, then, in that sense, because if we look at the situation that we had a catastrophe in one way or another, X amounts of thousands of years ago, we had potentially a situation of massive amounts of earthquakes, maybe volcanic eruptions, if you will, then heating up of the stone. Could it be that the people who lived back then and maybe through a period like this went through a similar and, if you will, then natural form of these kinds of experience that you went through, Chris? What's your take on that?
It's an interesting thought, but I don't think so, because it might be possible, but certainly volcanic ash and volcanic pumice is more like virgin stone because it's melted right back to its core. You need this quartz because it contains water. I mean, it's the basis of what makes your watch tick on your wrist if it's an electric watch or your cell phone work. So it is. We understand it and we harness it. They just understood it differently and harnessed it differently in a much bigger way, covering hectares of ground with stones in very precise positions, like huge pieces of circuitry. But I don't think it could have. These things can arrive naturally. Sometimes maybe there is a charged stone that they could have found, and then this was a way of copying it. Maybe so. But the fact is, somebody worked it out. You often find people today are so arrogant when we say that people from prehistory achieved this and they understood the Earth's rotation of speed and so forth. They said, how could they have possibly understood that? But I say to them, well, you understand it. Do you think you're so smart and they're so stupid? What tells you they have to be stupid? Right,
exactly.
They don't have to be stupid. They just go about things in a different way. And Alan and I involved an engineer who was a specialist, a very, very interesting engineer, specialist in Earth subjects, came over to join us, and from Northern Ireland, and a very pragmatic, very serious, straight-laced engineer. And he went away and said, I'm just so disturbed because whatever these people had, referring to the megalithic builders, he said, their view of the world was so different to ours, so massively different, we can't even comprehend it. They were onto something huge.
Well, I mean, absolutely. If we just think about it, Chris and Alan, of course, as well, your thoughts on this. I mean, we are very, very scattered in our focus today with the information overload. We have thousands of duties to do, jobs to go to. Then we have television, media, advertisement. Imagine how quiet it must have been in a age like that, when you can actually focus on something. You can actually feel the earth, the intention and nature around you. It must have been completely different, you know.
I think we started to lose it around the 18th century to some extent, because we had some great thinkers. But as things got smarter in the 1800s and the 1900s and through to today, there's so much knowledge, as you say, flying around us, and people that are doing scientific work, taking PhD, for example, they're drilling down to such tiny, narrow subjects, and no one's taking a broad view.
That's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
These people took a broad view. They understood the landscape.
They weren't confined by a academic approach that you have to do it this way. Your thoughts on this, Alan?
Well, it's very interesting what you were saying, Henrik, about a much quieter world, a place where you can concentrate more. At the time that Freemasonry started to evolve in a modern sense, in the 1700s, that also coincided with a period where those people who were rich enough to be able to do it were trying to send themselves back to that kind of state. They were getting gardeners like Capability Brown into their estates to build these vast open spaces with trees and trying to rebuild something primitive. There was a real leaning in that sort of direction, partly perhaps because it's an instinctive thing that humanity wants, but maybe because so many of those people were also proto-modern Freemasons, because they understood that there was something important about it. It's amazing how often also, for example, they built themselves artificial stone structures which served no purpose whatsoever, but just stood there on the landscape as oddities, and maybe there was more to it than meets the eye. So I think your assessment of the situation is quite right.
And even the architectural styles we have today, Alan, is very different as well. We even don't have real stone anymore in the buildings in some cases. It's all fake and plastic, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely, and there's no chance of concrete, for example, reacting in the same way that the kind of stones they used reacted in. It wouldn't matter how much you heated concrete. It's not the right kind of material. But going back to that, I have to reiterate, some of the stones that we're talking about are absolutely massive.
Yeah.
But yet we know they were heated up, and the physical effort of doing it was colossal. They would have needed to fell huge stands of trees just to have the fuel necessary to heat up the stones.
Chris?
And indeed carcasses, because you need the wood alone wouldn't do that.
No, you need fat.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, guys, let's begin, I guess, then for the first hour here to wrap things up. And as I mentioned, Alan, you're leaving us here for the first hour. But let's run through some of the details here again in terms of the websites that you have out there, and of course the book titles as well. We've been talking about, I guess, a combo here between Civilization One, The World Is Not As You Thought It Was, also together with Who Built the Moon. And the latest book out currently is called Before the Pyramids, Cracking Archaeologists' Greatest Mystery, and they're all available through Amazon. But Alan, do you have a personal website out there that people can go to?
Well, the website I use the most, which explains some of these ideas and some of my other ideas, is called Washington, D.C. chamberofsecrets.com.
Washington, D.C. chamberofsecrets.com.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Excellent. We will have that linked up as well then. And Christopher, tell us your website as well so people can find more information about you and your work.
I'm ashamed to say I spend my life helping other people to create their websites, and mine's always just that bit behind, and it's not there yet. Okay,
absolutely. Whenever you have that up and ready, you can send that to us, Chris. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, there's a lot of information out there. You guys are written on Graham Hancock's forum. There is some other sites referring to I guess your work on the Hiram Key. I guess Robert Lomas is the primary caretaker of those sites, Christopher.
Well, they're pretty dormant, I'm afraid.
Okay.
They haven't moved on for years.
I see. All right. Well, in that regard, do check out the work. Obviously, it's very, very interesting, and we're looking forward to talking more with you then in the next hour here for our members, Christopher Knight. But in the meantime, then, Alan Butler, thank you so much for joining us here for the first hour, and we'd obviously love to talk with you again if we get the opportunity.
And I'd love to talk to you, Henrik. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In the second hour, we proceed with Christopher Knight and talk about messages in our DNA. More on the moon, its attributes, effects on human life, and why we haven't been back there. We discuss the founding of America as a Masonic experiment and the incredible detail that has gone into the building of Washington, D.C., as modeled after Zion. The Pentagon has been modeled after Stonehenge, and it's been designed according to ancient megalithic measurements, and we talk much more about this and also why this is the case in terms of the war office or monument that the Pentagon is. Chris will also discuss the Masonic belief about the New Jerusalem and Yahweh coming back to rule Earth. Chris talks about the fact that there is a Masonic agenda despite what the Masons at the lower level think they know. This is at the very top layers of Masonry. Later we get into the very interesting connection between original Masonry, the Nordic builders, Freemasonry in Scandinavia, and the connection to the Jewish priesthood. Don't miss this very exciting continuation with Christopher Knight as we gain more insight into his findings and ideas on many of the subjects that he's been writing about. Subscribe or log in to download or stream this or any of our previous programs and get access to all the other material on our website, redicecreations.com. Upcoming guests on Red Ice Radio, we have David Hatcher Childress and Brian Forrester, Wayne Herschel, Alex Putney, Santos Bonacci, Jan Irvin, Nick Redfern, Robert Boval, Hugh Newman, Penny Pierce, Kevin Annette, John Coleman, and Will Hart. But right now we'll proceed with Christopher Knight in our members area. Don't miss it.